So beneath the epidermis, what we have is the dermis. And the dermis is going to be composed of two different layers. The top, or the superficial layer that is going to be closest to the epidermis, is the papillary layer, which is going to be composed of areolar tissue. So this is where we have the cushioning portion of our skin. Underneath that, or deep, what we have is the reticular layer of the dermis, and this is going to be composed of dense irregular connective tissue. All right, so the superficial layer of the dermis is going to be, again, the papillary layer here. All right, and so this is going to be smaller than the reticular layer, and this will be directly adjacent to the epidermis. The composition is going to be areolar connective tissue, and the dermal papilla and the epidermal ridges are going to interlock. And so here, what we've outlined, so it has this bumpy-like appearance to it, okay, as well as the epidermis. And the important thing is for this is that it helps to increase surface area between both the epidermis and the dermis. So the dermal papilla, again here, is going to have different capillaries, which in this, what we see is here, capillaries, blood vessels, that are going to have the nutrients that is needed for the epidermis. Because again, the epidermis is going to be avascular, so for diffusion of nutrients to occur, it has to occur within this papillary layer. All right, the second layer of the dermis is going to be the reticular layer, which is going to be now deeper compared to the papillary layer. And this is going to make up the majority of the dermis. And its composition is of dense, irregular connective tissue. And so what we'll find here are large bundles of collagen. We'll have lots of blood vessels. Also, we'll have different glands and hair follicles, as well as different types of nerves. So the collagen bundles help to connect then the dermis to the underlying hypodermis, which is going to be where we find a lot of adipose tissue. I'm sure you've wondered how individuals have stretch marks and wrinkles and why some don't. Well, a lot of this has to do with our protein of collagen and elastic protein fibers. All right, so when we have skin that's overstretched, the collagen fibers might tear to form different stretch marks. And so here's an example of stretch marks. And this can happen anywhere in the body. And this individual had it happen on their back, but this can happen in the stomach region as well as within the thighs. With pregnancy and breastfeeding, that happens within the breasts. But this can be a trigger when there's an excess of weight gain and weight loss, but also just with breakdown of proteins. All right, so how we get them is, again, through the collagen and elastic fibers. And these are going to be oriented in parallel bundles that are specific to body locations. The function is, though, to resist different types of stress. So these are termed by lines of cleavage. And so here in this picture, what we have are directions and orientations of lines of cleavage. So if you have an incision that's going to be perpendicular to the cleavage line, there may be a delay in healing, and oftentimes we have scars that remain. Whereas if you're parallel with incision lines, then usually a quick healing and also no large scabs form over time. Also, problems though that have occurred with surgeries before these cleavage lines have really been identified is that when the skin fuses back together as well as the muscle beneath it has a hard time, and there's a constant pulling, and so a lot of individuals have pain associated with it. Well, then lastly, wrinkles. This has to do with our dermal layer as well. And so with UV light exposure and aging, a lot of stress and overall expression, like in our faces, will decrease the flexibility and thickness of the dermis, and what we end up is with wrinkles. All right, the hypodermis or the subcutaneous layer is not actually part of the integument because it doesn't meet the requirements of what it means to be part of the integument, okay? So because of that, it only has a limited amount of functions. Now, the hypodermal layer is going to be composed of two different connective tissue. The first is of areolar connective tissue, so helps with cushioning. And then what we have here is adipose tissue. And so you can tell that easily by these large globular cells that we find. All right, so functions though are going to be protection of underlying structures. Typically under our skin is we find muscles or we find connective tendon sheaths underneath it. Also, what we have is storage of energy due to the adipose cells, and then thermal insulation, again, too, by adipose. All right, so here in this picture, I just want to point out, so the yellow is representing the fat or the adipose, and then here, this would be the layer of the areolar connective tissue. Again, not part of the integument, but obviously plays a very important role for it.